in the Bureau of Prisons now. He's been transferred out of the Glynn County Detention Center in Georgia and en route or somewhere in the state of Washington, but we don't have an address for him right now to continue correspondence with him, but we will be praying for him during Mass and for the other Kings Bay plowshares. But I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you all for praying with us and praying together. We're lifting up our hearts for peace, and I also want to thank the Catholic Committee of Appalachia for its leadership and for providing us with this massive Zoom account, and also to Pax Christi, all of you who may not be directly with Catholic Committee, but instead with Pax Christi for joining us and for supporting this. We, Pax Christi, as you know, issued a statement today. This is today, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons enters into force. And it's been in a way, a long time coming, in that in advance of the vote to even start to work on a treaty, and the negotiations which happened throughout 2017. There was a lot of groundwork done, but on July 7th, 2017, 122 countries of the world agreed to the wording of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And then takes a while for the paperwork to get done. And then on September 20th that year of 2017, the first signatures were allowed to be presented, and the first ratifications were allowed to be presented at the UN. The Vatican was one of the Holy See, was one of the first parties to not only sign, but also to present the ratification. And I was privileged to get a ticket. Actually, it was a kind of a lottery drawing, so I was able to not only be at the UN during the negotiations, to make a presentation there on behalf of us, also to witness the first day of signing, meeting Archbishop Gallagher afterwards. I've been very, very lucky to be a very, 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 very small part of this, but I'm passionate about it, and I'm so glad that you all are with us to celebrate, because this is. I said it was a long haul, but really, this is only 4 years later from the beginning of the negotiations to today, that this treaty has sailed through, and I believe that it's an indicator that the world is ready to end the nuclear era. The treaty is important in that it recognizes the humanitarian impact, the gross injustice that nuclear weapons pose to all of us and to the planet. And it's the first time that, even though there are other arms control treaties, that humanitarian law is invoked in the treaty. And also the first time when individuals like women and children, women and girls specifically, are understood and recognized to be disproportionately harmed by ionizing radiation. So the science, from the humanitarian standpoint, from the gross injustice, but I learned from people who had been involved, very closely involved with the negotiation of the treaty, that there was an attempt, a request to include the immorality of nuclear weapons in the treaty itself. That did not happen, to their chagrin, but still they are in effect, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons does express the immorality of nuclear weapons. So why do we want to do this anyway? Why do we want to ban nuclear weapons? I think that Father McSorley said it best back in 1977 when he wrote an article called "It's a Sin to Build a Nuclear Weapon." He said, "The taproot of violence in our society today is our intent to use nuclear weapons. Once we have agreed to that, all other evil is minor in comparison. Until we squarely face the question of for our consent to use nuclear weapons, any hope of large-scale improvement of public morality is doomed to failure. The nuclear weapons of communists," this was back in the 70s, "may destroy our bodies, but our intent to use nuclear weapons destroys our souls. So we must work on this." And so, like I said, I had the surprising, I mean, really, it was shocking to me when I got asked to give testimony at the UN. And this was all during the negotiations. There were what they called side events that were side sessions, rather. They were like seminars for the ambassadors and for the people who were in UN, people working on the treaty. And so I presented a 10-minute talk that focused on us here in Appalachia. Where I am in Northeast Tennessee is in the Nolichucky watershed. And the Nolichucky River flows out of North Carolina and then through the mountains, ultimately empties into Douglas Lake. And I'd been an environmentalist, mostly focusing on clean water and forest issues and clean air issues. Got involved with nuclear issues in the mid-90s with depleted uranium, working mostly on depleted uranium issues, but then learned about the company here called Nuclear Fuel Services. Now, Nuclear Fuel Services is the only company in the country that makes the fuel for the nuclear navy. Without this company's fuel, those nuclear submarines, those Trident submarines, could not go sailing, could not deploy nuclear weapons at sea. So it's an important component of what's called the nuclear triad. And that's one horrible thing about the company. The other horrible thing about the company is that it pours its nuclear waste on the ground, into the air, and into the water. And so my testimony was about what we live under, the cloud of atomic pollution that nuclear fuel services spews into the air. And so so I did that, and you know, this is not to say that I had any effect. Please don't misunderstand me. I had to say it, and I was asked to say it. I can't say that it had any effect on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, but it needs to be understood that for us here today, that nuclear weapons not only have an impact on our souls, and that we, being complicit, are willing to exert this horrible violence on other people, that this violence is also being done to us at the same time. It's also being done to our children. There's a playground in Irwin. It since has been torn down. That had it was the backyard of a family's home that had one of those children's playgrounds, and that piece of property was up against the border of nuclear fuel services, and there was a radiation symbol on the right next to the playground that beware. For these kids, the kids are living with, and this is the truth, pouring out of the stacks of nuclear fuel services are uranium of all the isotopes, thorium 228, 230, 232, technetium-99, poured into the river all kinds of radioactive isotopes. And like I said, I've been involved in a lot of nuclear sleuthing work, let's say, with a chemist named Michael Ketterer, who the Christian Peacemakers teams found for us. And we found highly enriched uranium even in the drinking water supply in Greenville, Tennessee, which is 18 miles downstream from nuclear fuel services. So it's a blight. It's a blight on our health. It's a blight on our, and it's a terrible. It would be something that we need to prevent from happening to the world. So I want to. You'll notice when we have Mass later on that we have a number of special intentions, that the petitions, and the last petition is a thanks to the Vatican's support. Like I said, the Vatican has been very outspoken, and Pope Francis's leadership on this couldn't be better, and it's so much appreciated. And by the way, from communities that I deal with on interfaith work that I do with United Religions Initiative, Pope Francis's lead is applauded by all of the faith communities, all of them. I work with retired Bishop William Swing. He's formerly the Episcopal Bishop of California, and he's the founder of United Religions Initiative. And but you name it, from the Buddhists to the Episcopalians to the Presbyterians, everyone else is applauding Pope Francis's leadership on the issue. And they led prior to the formation of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons by holding a conference on disarmament and then recently produced this book called A World Free from Nuclear Weapons. And there was a seminar recently, which included the Archbishop Gallagher, who was the Vatican's representative at the UN, who submitted the signature and the ratification of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Well, everything was terrific about the seminar. Terrific. Until we get to the end. And someone asked Archbishop Gallagher, what are your plans about promoting the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons? There is no formal intention at this stage of doing so, he said. I think that the bishops' conferences are very aware of the position of the Holy See and what the Holy Father has said about this. We, generally speaking, like to leave such intentions up to the discretion of local bishops' conferences, because the response is different, obviously, in almost every country, depending on policies of governments. Then the archbishops joked. He said, I don't think a decree will go out from Caesar Augustus in this respect. So I was disappointed, I'd say. And so I think that we need to keep in mind then what Father George Zabelka said. Now, Father George was the priest at the time during World War II who blessed the bombardiers who dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. And then in 2011, he gave a talk and he said this: we must all become prophets. I really mean that. We must all do something for peace. We must stop this insanity of worshiping the gods of metal. We must take a stand against evil and idolatry. This is our destiny at the most critical time of human history. But it's also the greatest opportunity ever on any group of people in the history of the world to save our world from complete annihilation. So I see that we've got some younger folks with us, and those of us who have been at this a while, I don't have a whole lot of gray hair, but I'm certainly feeling my age, and it's but still it is all up to us, but we would appreciate the energy of youth. And after what Archbishop Gallagher said, it's clear that it is up to us, even within our churches, and in our among our communities, no matter whether they're a church community or your knitting club or whatever, or book club, to advance the goal of ending this scourge of nuclear weapons. So I've left my screen in the gallery view because I'd like to open it up for anyone who wants to say how they feel today about the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons entering into force, whether you think, whether you're hopeful or not, or what you think. I just would love to have a discussion. I see Jim Ulrich is here. I see And I know that he's been active with the Oak Ridge Environmental Peace Alliance, which in Tennessee is, as y'all, if you're in Appalachia, you may know that their leadership is bar none um, in organizing actually the events of today, of which this is one of many. But we're honored to have all of you here, and so if you've got a comment, just raise your hand or unmute yourself and barge right in, or a question, and I'd be happy to engage you.
Linda, I just want to thank you for your courage, for your consistency, for your wisdom. And you're right. We just need to keep conversing about this. We have to help make people aware, whether through the written word or the spoken word, with our neighbors, with our friends, with strangers. And I think that now is an important time, because you're right, when there's this kind of convergence on the international level at the United Nations, we have to make sure that this voice and this commitment enters our homes. But first of all, in the spirit of Pax Christi, we pray, we study, and then we act. We look to Los Alamos and we say, what can I do? Knowing that everything, even saying those two words to somebody, could be the dawning of a consciousness that we wouldn't otherwise expect. And to pray as we did, this beautiful rosary that takes us back to the prophets of the Jewish tradition, to the prophets that Jesus heard when he went to synagogue, to the prophetic witness he gave at the cost of the commitment of his whole life and the gift of his whole life. We've got to let that spirit of resurrection and possibility, lead us all, and not consider anything, any breath, small or too little. Just keep at it. As I said, with that consistency, that commitment that's clearly yours, that cares about the neighborhood children in the playground and the people who are building the bombs, because our own soul, our own spirit, our own lives are at stake from generation to generation, and we can change the world. Together.
Thank you, Jane. That was beautiful, and I really appreciate your kind words. One of my the work that I used to do when I used to get paid, before we adopted our daughter, I worked as an economist, and I was an industry economist, and so when numbers are kind of important to me. Let's say they help me understand an issue, and I don't know if this is going to be true for all of you, because we are in a I'm hoping that we can maintain our spiritual connection here, and sometimes numbers get in the way of doing that. But there's something called an opportunity cost in economics. That means if you spend money on one thing, you can't spend it on something else, because we have limited supply of money in our budget. The opportunity cost of nuclear weapons in 2019 no, in 2020, when we spent $35 billion on nuclear weapons, would have been during this pandemic, we could have had 300,000 beds in intensive care units, new ones, because, I don't know if you have seen that. There are special beds now that are super high tech to rotate patients to alleviate the pressure in their lungs because COVID does such damage to people's lungs. So those very expensive beds, plus 35,000 ventilators, plus the salaries of 150 nurses, plus the salaries of 75,000 doctors. Though that's what we could have had if we had not thrown our riches away on nuclear weapons. Going forward, we need to just tell our elected officials, in my way of thinking, just stop it. Cut these budgets. We don't need what I'd like to, even before the pandemic, I'd know folks in the anti-nuclear, other anti-nuclear activists were saying, can you tell us, politicians, what were those nuclear submarines doing for us, say, in terms of our war on terrorism? What good were they? What good are these Trident nuclear weapons against this deadly disease of COVID? They instead, if you look at it from an opportunity cost standpoint, they are making our situation worse. And if you look at it also from the environmental standpoint, from the fact that people's bodies, including our indigenous brothers and sisters out west, where uranium is mined and milled and processed, that the contamination of our bodies with these radioactive toxins also diminishes our health, and so made the situation of the pandemic worse for us as a people. So there are a number of issues that if you however you feel comfortable, I would ask and encourage you really to be the prophet that we need to be, and to lift our voices up for an end to this insanity, this madness, as mutually assured destruction clearly defines it. So if I may be a substitute teacher for a moment, and if I could call on somebody, I hope you wouldn't mind. Michael Black is, I see you paying attention, and I wonder, and I welcome you here, and I wonder what brought you here. And you're, I think, one of the youngest of our community today, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, please.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing in your witness, your beautiful witness. The real privilege to be here. I work at a nonprofit in Salem, West Virginia, in Doddridge County, called Nazareth Farm, and we mostly focus on home repair in our local area. But yeah, I'm just constantly inspired by the witnesses for peace throughout ages. And when this kind of mini retreat was brought my attention by our wonderful director, Alison Petrie, I hopped on board and took the day out on a porch to stay on the farm and do some work and be here. And yeah, excited and hopeful for the ban going into effect today. But also just thinking of nuclear energy beyond weapons as well. Also technologically mapped here. But yeah, wondering, especially if you have any thoughts about the use of nuclear energy. You know, I think of words of Wendell Berry, another great Appalachian, and his thoughts about energy and our use, or maybe better yet, our abuse of energy, and nuclear is just kind of another step on that staircase of abuse. And yeah, but thinking about many things, and very grateful to be here. I know I didn't really say anything there, but I'm always learning and always working towards peace inside my own soul. So I know that is all a huge part of witnessing for peace and love in our world.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. Love is really what we're working to build, a beloved community, right? We're wanting to end the culture of war. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard because there's so much money in it. If you will indulge me for 1 second, I'll pull out one of the last lines of my sections of my talk when I was surprisingly and really completely unqualified to do this. But anyway, I was at when I gave my talk at the UN, I had to tell folks that there had been I can't find the spot anyway. There had been a cancer study going on here. The National Academy of Sciences had been contracted by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to study the effects of the pollution that nuclear fuel services was wreaking on the area. And of all of the nuclear neighborhoods in the country, Irwin, Tennessee, became one of the sites where the National Academy of Sciences was going to do a pilot study. Well, we were almost in disbelief that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was going to engage in this study and actually spend money on it. And so the Nuclear Regulatory Commission had dug out boxes and boxes of old files to go back, because this company has been here since the 50s. And so we needed the old environmental reports. Well, the scientists from the National Academy needed the old environmental reports in order to do their study well. So they dug them out, and amazing. They were really spending their time, and it looked like things were going great, and that we really were going to have a true assessment of the impact of this company on the health of our community. And then the Nuclear Regulatory Commission said, well, it's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to cost into the millions of dollars. We can't afford it. We were not going to do it. So they pulled the plug on the study. So, like Pope Francis said, and I said in my talk, that this is all about money. And he said, Pope Francis said, it's about money drenched in blood. That's what the arms race is about. Now, you asked about nuclear power, and I do have. I am an opponent of nuclear power. It is adopted by the way, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, as saying that that countries have the right to the peaceful use of nuclear power. But there is nothing peaceful about the atom when it is ingested by people, when the contaminants are unleashed on the environment or into the air, and you breathe in even uranium, which is mostly alpha radiation. There's a difference if it's outside your body, a big difference. But what's inside your body is right up against is able to cross the cell barrier, ingested in your lungs. It's an opportunity for the growth of cancers. And so also another aspect of nuclear power that just from the history of it, it was the happy face on nuclear weapons. The Atoms for Peace program was put out there for the purpose of making people forget how horrible the horrors that we unleashed on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. That yes, we can do something good with the atoms, but it's really all about money. And once again, it's an opportunity cost. These nuclear power stations cost billions and billions of dollars, and they produce nuclear waste. There's no solution for that nuclear waste. We need to stop making it because of the damage that it does forever. You know, uranium is radioactive for that's just its half-life, over 5 billion years, which is more or less the life of the planet. So that's my opinion, but it's not illegal under the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. One thing that we have to watch out for in our advocacy in the future is, during the previous administration, there was a deal with Saudi Arabia to expand for 40 or more nuclear power plants. Here we are, the land of desert with more exposed area where where solar could power the whole of the East, if instead the money were spent that way. But instead they want nuclear power plants. Now, why do they want nuclear power plants? Well, because the waste from nuclear power plants includes plutonium. The plutonium is one of the elements that once it's reprocessed out of the spent fuel, would be used to fashion nuclear weapons. So it's a kind of a back door to nuclear weapons, and it's in my view, it's just a smokescreen. It's like I said, the happy face on nuclear weapons.
One of my Jesuit companions studying theology used to frequently say that his role was to put the social back into social justice. And by that, he was emphasizing the importance of moments like this, the importance to celebrate the milestones, the victories, the progress that has been made, because otherwise we can be pretty frustrated when we're trying to work for peace in a world that often chooses violence. When we want to work for equality in the world that's pretty comfortable with the inequalities that already exist. When we want to work for justice, when some would want to put a price on justice and decide for whom justice really applies. When we make progress, when we see something coming together, when we see a law that transcends national boundaries, we know we're moving in the right direction. And even if we move slowly, today we can rejoice that 61 nations have signed this treaty for the end of nuclear weapons. We can remember that among the first signers, the very day that this treaty was open for signing, the Vatican signed on in the name of the church. In the name of a global community, not just the tiny city-state completely surrounded by the city of Rome, but for all of us. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to help get the word out that this is something important. We know that Pope Francis has continued to build on the teachings of his predecessors, and he tells us of the importance of living as community, living as brothers and sisters, living as friends. In his most recent encyclical that was signed on the feast of St. Francis and taking its name from the writings of St. Francis, the Pope calls us to truly live as brothers and sisters, and he doesn't hesitate to proclaim something that many might dismiss as utopian, as naive, as unrealistic. The Pope rather puts it in pretty blunt terms and asks, do we really have another chance? Do we have another choice? We've seen what a global pandemic can do when we divide ourselves, when we compete for resources, where we have no coordinated efforts to combat it and to address it, when it brings out the inequalities that have long been overlooked. When we see people of color and people who earn minimum wage or less dying more frequently, more regularly, and suffering more severely from the same virus that others can afford treatment for and find themselves quickly mended. If we can't combat that kind of reality together, how much harder will it be to address the changing climate and the continuing advancement towards our own destruction? How much harder will it be to challenge the interests of those who continue to profit from the preparation for war and not make us any safer? The prophet Micah dreams in that first reading of swords beaten into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks, taking weapons designed for killing and for ending life and turning them into the means of production of food to nourish and sustain life. How much more could we do if we took the budget for nuclear weapons and for nuclear testing and for the security around nuclear sites and for all that has gone into nuclear weapons ever since their development and their first horrific use in 1945, if those resources had been put to eliminating disease, to feeding the hungry, to providing shelter, to addressing climate change, to reducing the need for migrants and refugees to flee their homelands. Too many of us, including in the church, have bought into the crazy idea that having nuclear weapons is a deterrent. We can build up more and more stockpiles of weapons to scare anybody else from having that. Human beings aren't like that. If I have more, you want more, they want more, etc. We hear in the gospel message from Jesus today that vengeance doesn't get us anywhere. It's one of the most frequently misquoted passages in Scripture, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I can't tell you how many times I hear proponents of the death penalty claiming that that's what Jesus said, when in fact what he's doing is saying an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. We cannot give in to that urge for vengeance. We cannot give in to that desire to annihilate the other. In Fratelli Tutti, that most recent encyclical of Pope Francis, he laments the fact that even the institutions in society that are meant to help us work out problems and to create solutions together have devolved into this kind of entity that requires the annihilation of the other. It's not just enough to be right. It's not just enough to have one's policy approved. It's not just enough to win an election. One has to annihilate the other in the way things are going. The disciples of Jesus have to have a different approach. The disciples of Jesus have to recognize that he who came to bring peace into our divided world wants us to be the agents and the messengers and the builders of that peace. It takes work. We know that we have to root out the tendency toward violence in our own hearts. We know that sometimes from clenched teeth and biting our tongues, we listen to horrible things being said by people who are supposed to lead us. But we have to work through those emotions and find the right channel to direct that into building up efforts for good, efforts for building up the common good, efforts for promoting the dignity of the human person. In our tradition, it's supported the dignity of the human person and promoting the common good, which should be the goal and the ends of politics, not winners or losers, not taking revenge. We just witnessed a hopeful moment in the history of our nation and a moment of promise. After so much division, after so much threats at our normalcy and our way of life, after the loss of civility, we know that things are not going to magically change overnight, but now we're reminded once again that it's possible. And we can build each other up in hope and build each other up with the promise of the good things that are happening. Not only does this treaty go into effect today, signed by 61 nations, and we have an urge now a compelling urge to convince more and more nations, including our own, to get on board with this. But we've also seen in the very first days of a Biden administration, the willingness to reach out to Russia and resume the START treaty, which is only a beginning, but frankly, we had taken too many steps backwards. So at least to begin that we're not going to increase the production of nuclear weapons and move towards their reduction. In his visit to Japan, leading up to this observances of the anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Pope Francis, as he often does, takes our Catholic social teaching a step further. He said, not only is the use of nuclear weapons clearly immoral, and that should be obvious to any person, but the possession of those weapons is itself immoral. Weapons only exist for one reason, to have the capacity to destroy. Our faith is about building up. is about nourishing, is about feeding. So we gather tonight virtually around this table in celebration. We gather to overcome the social distancing that has been so necessary during this pandemic and to forge a new kind of community, a new kind of connection with people who share the great goal of living Christ's peace, the peace of Christ. We also commit ourselves once again to being the builders of that peace, the agents of that peace, the co-creators of a new world where we can truly live as brothers and sisters and work out our differences towards the common good. As Pope Francis would ask, what other choice do we really have?